I would encourage each one of you to come forward and donate to our COVID-19 Relief Fund and help save and rehabilitate lives. I want to give special shout out to all our volunteers who've been working non-stop to provide relief or just by being there for anyone and everyone reaching out to us, especially our teams in HR, corporate services, Josh, Seva, Sabr, Shukr. Thank you so much for your Seva. I know many of us are in grief and mourning the loss of our friends or family members. Situations like these bring about pain, suffering, anxiety, and sadness to the best of us. And yet we are hopeful. We are hopeful of tomorrow being better. Today's session is going to be about that hope and how to channelize your energy through the power of spirituality and art to stay hopeful and help others. We have with us today the amazing Kanika Dewan, the founder and creative director of Car Design Atelier, a virtual integrated design business. Just like our very own COVID-19 response team frontliner Hitesh Wadhwa, who will join us shortly, Kanika was recently selected as the Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. She was also recognized as one of the top 40 global leaders by the Walton School of Business and has also earned a place in the Guinness Book of World Records for her work. Kanika will be launching her book on Spiritual Quotient and was kind enough to join us today, sharing her formula to sustainable happiness and path towards gratitude and goodness. Without any further ado, let's kick this off and let there be hope. Kanika, welcome to the show. Kanika, you're on mute.
Hi. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you, Sumit, and thank you for the welcome. This is a great way to spend my morning, and I loved the music at the beginning. I was meditating myself. I didn't want to speak, I wanted to continue. So I love the opening, and all the work you're doing was meditation in itself. So I want to start with some thoughts. So go with me here. August 2nd, 1990, the Gulf Crisis, which emerged into the Gulf War. May 2021, Israel-Palestine crisis that we're facing now. A decade after 1990, in 2000, we faced the Great Recession, a major financial crisis. 2021, we're still in economic crisis. 2019, fast forward. 2019, COVID-19. The world's worst health crisis, which we can't seem to fix, despite the fact that we've seen the Spanish flu, that we've seen SARS, and we've seen Ebola. 2020, the storming of the Capitol, COVID-19 still around, a political crisis. And 2021, COVID-19, India and Brazil, and I have a feeling, unfortunately, that Singapore and other countries may follow, are facing the world's worst health crisis all over again after opening up, despite the vaccine rollout. So the economic Forum calls it the Great Reset. The Relics Group calls it reimagining the future. And the press calls it the new normal. But there is nothing normal about this. And there is nothing new. We've just seen that we've gone from crisis to crisis to crisis for decades. So we're definitely doing something wrong. And I believe we're stuck in a crisis loop. Now, we continue to choose economic success. That is why the economy opened up when we then went to economic success over the individual valuing of human lives. And we're back in the same cycle. We looked at numbers falling. We opened up New York. We opened up India. We opened up Brazil. And we're back to the same crisis loop. So what are we doing wrong? We have chosen the very political system, the world that has created this crisis loop that we can't seem to see a way out of, that has left us in depression. And on an individual level, we're also stuck in a crisis. We have experienced loss of loved ones, of family members. We're stuck as far as motivation is concerned. We're stuck as far as happiness is concerned. But we're always looking at the larger numbers. We forget that the most important thing is the one aunt that someone lost, the one parent that someone lost, the one kid that someone lost. We start focusing on numbers and pat ourselves on the back and get back to reopening the economy. We get back to not wearing masks, and we're back in the same crisis. Now, my intent, I know, Sumit, you said hope, and my intent is not to depress the audience here, but to use the same shock that and re-shock the system with the same shock that has immobilized us into grief. And I hope that I can provide hope through a personal story, which I call the Cardinal of Hope. I don't know if all of you know, but if we share the slide of the cardinal, I want to show you what the cardinal is for those of us who have forgotten. The cardinal is a red bird, which often is known to say that it is a messenger of hope. It's often known as an angel coming to you as a messenger of hope. And you see a cardinal on that slide to remind you. 1 week ago, a cardinal came to my cousin's house in Florida, sat on her hand, as you see in the palm of her hand, and would not leave until she fed him and cleaned his beak. He'd still sat there, then thanked her by going on to, perched on her shoulder, went to the gate of her entryway, looked back, said thank you, and flew off, and comes on a daily basis every day to do the same. This was 1 week ago. 3 days prior, the reason you see that picture on the left, my uncle, the father of my cousin, the brother of my father, passed away to COVID in New Delhi, unfortunately, after falling into a coma within a 3-day period, and he decided to leave his physical self. He had passed away in Delhi, and my cousin, his second daughter, could not fly from Florida to New Delhi. His other daughter, who was also suffering from COVID, while her mother, his wife, was also in the ICU with COVID, was released because her symptoms were better, so she could perform the cremation all alone. My cousin could not attend, but the cardinal flew to her and flies there every day. Since then, within 10 days, you can see a smile on my face, and the family has been smiling ever since the cardinal visited. And I hope this story helps a little bit. And I know we're all thinking, wait, this is like Instagram, and everyone has this happy story, and what about me? Or sitting there saying, a lot of people are facing grief. A lot of people can't think beyond and wonder, will a cardinal visit them? Well, you know what? That's not what's important. It's everyone has a cardinal. It may not come in the form of a bird. It may come in the form of any soul. And if you don't see the signs, you can look within. It may come from within, the peace and happiness and the smile on your face that led us from grief to gratitude. I would say that what I have formulated, people, it's hard to move to that sense of peace. It's hard to find your inner soul. So how do you do it? And that's why we're here today, to channel the spiritual quotient. And that's something that I call the spiritual quotient. Often people say, what is the spiritual quotient? The spiritual quotient, to me, after a lot of introspection and formulation, which I have seen have helped a lot of people along the way, is a function of intuition, compassion, and fear. Now, I go back to a depressing word, fear. It is inversely proportional to fear. So if you reduce your fear and you increase your intuition, which is inner awareness and compassion, you reduce your fear. The Dalai Lama, I was very honored to meet the Dalai Lama and spend some time with him. And he told me, what is compassion? Compassion is the love with the absence of attachment. And I say, intuition, we've talked about, introspection and self-awareness. And how do we get to it? We'll talk about later. But I would say that the spiritual quotient is a function of intuition and compassion in the absence of fear and judgment. What I call, and how do we get rid of that? Well, what I call the fear factor is where we are now. We're in shock. We're in personal shock. We're in financial shock. We're in well-being shock. We're in various types of shock as a result of COVID. And we all know what those factors are. So you're on a mountain. The lion is your shock. You see this slide. You want to get to the other side, which I call innovation. What I call innovation, innovation is the great reset. Innovation is reimagining the future. Innovation is jumping to that mountain of hope, getting rid of your fear. You can't eliminate it completely. We're not going to be alive if we have no fear, but we can reduce it. And how do we reduce it? The spiritual quotient gets us closer to how we reduce it. There's actually a formulaic method that seems to apply every time. And I call that the gear factor. So if we switch to the slide of the gear factor, you jump from one mountain to the other to safety. And all you have to remember is safety, right? You're scared of jumping from one to the other because you're immobilized. You don't know how to hope anymore. You don't know how to release that fear or reduce it. So remember safety. Now, I'm going to shock you a little more because I'm going to say safety includes don't share. By don't share, what I mean is do the opposite of what you usually share. So if you usually share grief and you usually get on the phone and your general tendency is to go to your support network and say, I'm in grief, I suffer the loss. Think beyond a personal, think of your physical loss of your family member as the fact that it is a loss of a body, but not of a soul. Think of the one soul concept. Think of the cardinal. Think of the fact that the soul continues. That is the energy that you spoke to. It was not the body, it was the soul. If you're the type of person who covers it, who has imposter syndrome and puts on a smile, even when you're in grief, then don't put on the smile. Don't share that positive scenario that you're painting to be strong, but inside you're scared, inside your fear. You have a lot of fear. Instead, share the fear. So do the opposite of what you would intuitively do. Because you know what, when you go to your intuitive level, you realize that experience and intuition is separate. Don't analyze. By don't analyze, I mean you get stuck in analysis paralysis. So when you have gone through a period of mourning, a lot of the systems, religious systems, show us how to deal with a period of mourning by doing things like eating, sleeping. You will go to the Maslow's hierarchy at one point, but we're going to stick on the gear factor slide so that this sinks into your head. But they ask family members to visit. There's a certain period of mourning where you're told to remember those who have passed the physical self, and you remember all the good things and memories that they had. So you don't analyze your position that you're in, because analyzing is like worrying. You're in a rocking chair and you can't change what has passed, but you can change what's in the future by being in the present moment and being in peace. And we will talk about how we get to that. Focus. What I say is don't focus. Everyone goes focus. Meditation is focus. No, don't focus. Think out of the box. And I wanted to share a little story. The reason I have the artwork in my background is it's called Unity in Diversity. It was created for India when I was very depressed with these crises, with the corruption that India is facing, which even it is facing at the moment, with the fact that we're spending billions of dollars on defense spending instead of actually helping on the health side. Instead, we're asking people to donate. The government is asking people to donate, but yet somehow there's a defense budget to spend on defense instead of health, instead of lives. we're looking to spend on how to kill lives. So how do you get away from this? Often when you shift focus, during COVID, the first wave of COVID, I was in India. I did not anticipate being there for more than a month. I ended up being there for 10 months because I was stuck in lockdown and flights wouldn't fly to New York. And so what did I do? I said, okay, well, my business, I can't do anything. It's an infrastructure business. Everything shut down. We're at home. We can't go outside. We can't leave the premises. There's police patrolling outside. I can't get fresh air. And I'm the sort of person you can't lock inside a room. And what did I do? I just didn't focus. I said, what do I feel like doing? I feel like rapping. I created a rap on Apna Time Aayega. I went towards art. I focused more on my meditation. So I did not focus on what I usually focus on my daily life. Thinking out of the box really helped me grow. Don't exercise emotional restraint. That's the E in safety. E, don't exercise emotional restraint. And we'll talk about this a little later on. Hopefully, we can talk about why emotional restraint should not be focused on, and why that's important. And then we come to the T and the Y. So the T and the Y are about not yielding. Don't tell and don't yield. What that means is we want to focus on being in the present moment. And how do we do that? We go through Maslow's hierarchy to make sure that we can get through our lives by a foundation, which is sleeping, eating. The next foundation, if you feel like, we joke and we would hear on NDTV, Bollywood would often, they'd show in the heart of COVID, you'd show people in Bollywood going, oh, look, I did my manicure, pedicure today. Or look, I went and did exercise today. Or look, I started working out, and people are posting all these pictures on Instagram. And sometimes you think, wait, this sounds so superficial. This sounds so, it's not on a higher level of thinking when people are dying. But, that's when I say we need to let go of judgment. And we don't have all the time to talk about the judgment. When I said the spiritual quotient is intuition and compassion, a high level of intuition and compassion with a lack and a lower level of judgment and fear. We've talked about fear a lot here, but judgment may be another episode. But when you look at judgment, sometimes you judge incorrectly. Sometimes you need those, what we call the lower spiritual levels in Maslow's hierarchy, the lower needs, to take baby steps to get to the higher need. Eventually, it's a walk in the park. Eventually, it's embracing nature. Eventually, it's then meditation. And when I talk about meditation, when I say don't yield, people say, I can't meditate, I can't focus. Well, there are various means of meditation. Anything that you enjoy that brings you in the current moment is meditation. Myself, I do chanting, I do Buddhist chanting, I do the Gayatri Mantra, but also what I feel is exercise is an important part. Exercise stills the body. Yoga prepares the mind for it to be stilled. So it's like a Maslow's hierarchy for spirituality, which is separate. And I go from the basics of eating, sleeping, to exercising, to then doing what defocuses you, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's going to talk to your friends, whether it's going online shopping. It defocuses you. It then makes you forget about your current problem. And the reason I say that is the launch to spirituality is surrender. And that's why I say don't focus. When you launch to surrender, and surrender happens at its lowest point. So even though I painted a picture of gloom and doom and crisis, the fact that we're at our lowest point means we're already in the trajectory to reach the pinnacle of the mountain. Because when you're in the lowest point, you can't think anymore. You can't focus anymore. You surrender. And it's when you surrender, you let down the frameworks, you let down the imposter syndrome, you become your intuitive soul, your energy that then connects to the universal energy. and you reach that self-actualization at the top of Maslow's hierarchy. So let's say you practice yoga. Yoga stills the mind or makes it, prepares it for stillness. Then you could go to chanting. Chanting helps vibration, singing or chanting. That's why I went to a rap. At that time, I was feeling too unsettled. I couldn't do my chanting. I couldn't do Buddhist chanting. I couldn't do the Gayatri Mantra. There's a vibration that has been within us for years and years, no matter what religion. And that helps us to focus. I said defocus, but then it helps us to refocus in a positive way, going back to what we, to our true selves in a way that we come into the present moment through chanting, which then stills the body, stills the mind in preparation for further actualization and self-actualization, such as other techniques, such as Sahaj Samadhi, which I use, and other meditation techniques such as NLP. And that's a whole other session of what those techniques are. There's so much in the world that we have to learn, but this is the right time to do it. And that is how we can gradually get to that pinnacle of hope. I hope the story I shared with you leads you to hope. And I wanted to leave you with one thing, which is a Hindu philosophy. And as I said, spirituality is not about religion. Religion can divide, as you said, Corona divides, Sumit, but spirituality unites. And what I wanted to say was we can learn from every religion to unite in spirituality. The Hindu religion has the philosophy called Leela. Leela means the divine play. And I hope that a little snippet of what I shared today and the conversation that we're going to continue and the wonderful work that you're doing here with Mahindra Foundation, and especially these sessions that you're putting together, which I know are at the root of an honest, authentic foundation to provide help. I hope that we follow the Leela and that I've encouraged you to live life and get ready to play. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kanika, for inspiring us with your personal stories. Now, this would be a good segue to bring another compassionate high achiever and a young global leader from Tech Mahindra, Hitesh, to take this into a conversation mode with some questions from one YGL to another.
Thank you so much. And I hope you guys can hear me properly. And Kanika, I know when we started this session, you said the music was like meditation to you. Honestly, the last 20 minutes, I actually felt I was meditating because listening to you was no less than that. It was deep, very profound. Some of the thoughts that will always stay with me are the cardinal concept that you explain and things like soul stays, because that's so important and deep and important for all of us, just that we tend to forget because we always associate our lives with, the body. Things like doing the opposite, that was a very, very different way of looking at things. Spiritual quotient is nothing but combination of intuition and compassion. What I want to do is for the next few minutes, understand more, maybe do a deep dive into these subjects, and for the audience, for us to understand you better, your journey, and how you've arrived here. We would love to know you because most of the people like us on the call are part of the corporate culture. Either some of us are entrepreneurs, but would love to know your journey, from investment banker to now owning your own virtual integrated design business and then entering into the world of spirituality. I think that's a very, very, I sense a very powerful story here. Would you like to share it with us?
Sure. I think Hitesh, thank you for saying that you were being too kind, but I'm glad if something stuck. I think the one thing I did want to say is I usually, when talking about spiritual quotient, don't like to identify myself as me. Because when I'm in that meditative state, and for me, even talking here has been meditative. The way you've set this up and your intention, I can feel. You often feel intention. Even through Zoom calls and WebEx, and one would think they wouldn't, but I can feel the group intention here with Sumit and yourself and others that have contributed to this. And I I would like to leave it as, if I said, what has my journey been? It's been the journey of a soul, the journey of energy. But I know people want to connect that to the business world, and so I'll do a few words on that, which is our vertically integrated design business is a manufacturing business which goes from natural sources such as your mines, whether they're stone mines, steel mines, to the end user. It's a vertically integrated business that I started 20 years ago after graduating from Wharton. And I did not want to go into, and why I first did investment banking, you're right. And I felt the world of investment banking was all about money. And even though I went to Wharton and studied everything to do with money, somehow either I was in the wrong fit, but I think my childhood journey came into play, where I've had the privilege of meeting spiritual leaders such as Sri Sri, such as Ramindra Swami, recently meeting Dadi Janki, Sri Sri from Art of Living, Dadi Janki, who passed away during COVID last year, who at 103, from the Brahma Kumaris, and the Dalai Lama, which was really the pinnacle of it all. But I've been blessed to be the universe aligning with me with those energies. And I think that made me philosophize throughout my life. And I said, I want to start a business that is spiritual. And you might think, what is design and build? How is it spiritual? Well, the philosophy of our business is a vertically integrated solution which promotes well-being through the spaces we live in. We spend most of our lives in spaces. We don't live outside anymore. We don't live in nature. So how do we bring the energy of nature inwards? How does that inspire us, and how does that inspire our souls? And that's why we use natural materials, but we also use zero waste concept. So everything's a circular economy. So there's a zero waste concept, whether we use stone in our design. Artwork is used in a design because artwork promotes a lot of well-being. It allows our employees to be artistic. It allows myself to be artistic. I learned the journey of art. There's a zero waste piece in my background. It's made from zero waste in stone. That's an example, as I said earlier, it's unity through diversity and other pieces like that. Well, I found in the moments of crisis, I could sketch. Yet I, during school, was always positioned into the finance mode, into economics. All my success stories were, the best grades were in economics. So, I was scared of art class. So I discovered this much later. And I did it after I started experimenting with the spiritual quotient and self-actualization. Then it came to me. So that's a little bit about the journey, and what the business means, and how I wanted to incorporate the silos of business and life and integrate them. And that's why the pillars we stand upon are anti-corruption in the infrastructure world, ethics, and that's why it's vertically integrated. Because when you're in control of the source and you're in control of the end result in infrastructure, you can control the ethical value chain as well, and therefore promote well-being and get closer to the spiritual quotient.
Thank you, Kanika. I think that was indeed a very, I never thought you actually can possess spiritual quotient, because when we think of quotients, we always think of IQ or EQ, which technically can be acquired through training, through practice. But what about spiritual quotient? And can we measure the degree of spiritual quotient that one possesses? And if one were to imbibe spiritual quotient in their daily and personal and professional lives, what's your thought on how can that be done?
So I think the first part is, I addressed a lot of tools, a few tools that you can imbibe and start with to achieve the spiritual quotient. When I was talking earlier, in terms of how do you measure it? That is a very good question, and we are working on a spiritual index to make sure that GDP, and I talked about economic measures of success, which is the reason for the downfall and all the crises that I talked about over the last several decades and years and umpteen years, is that we prioritize GDP over the spiritual quotient. So we are creating villages of sustainable happiness where we can measure the spiritual index, which is a very difficult thing to measure. So we start with components of the happiness index, which talk about education, health, wellness, but it goes further. It has to talk about a sense of peace, and that can be measured by observation. We have to observe, literally go into people's homes like Big Brother in a way, and observe their state of mind. You can often see it on the face. You can see if there's a frown, if there's a smile. You can see and sense that energy. We're also trying to develop, use technology, as Sumit said, in a good way to unite by using brain scanners, emotional, sensors, bring in the health aspect of it to look at your pulse rate, your heart rate. These are various measurements. It's a much deeper topic to go into, but hope it touches a little bit on what you said.
Very interesting. And Kanika, if you allow me to maybe, digress a little bit, because a lot of us are actually either have family members in India or are from India. And we all know India is going through some really tough times with, a huge number of patients and lack of beds and oxygen facilities. Some of us have lost so many loved ones, and I'm so sorry to hear about your loss. As and you so and some have actually also suffered through the disease, or in the US. So all in all, everything has led to pain, crisis, stress, anxiety, and we are doing our bit, at Tech Mahindra. Through our foundation, we're driving a change through our COVID helpline. We even came up with the COVID SOS Seva to help, people get medical facilities and financial support. How can spiritual quotient, help in getting past the visible cloud of gloom and distress?
Well, there are two ways. One is, as I referred to the Maslow's hierarchy, you start reaching a system of self-actualization if you start at the foundation. If we are better selves ourselves, we can be intellectually, have a high intellectual quotient and be smart. There are many politicians who have a high IQ. And we can learn to have a high EQ. Sometimes an EQ can be emotional, means emotional quotient can also be powerful in two ways. An emotional quotient can be high, but it could be high for yourself or for your immediate group of family members, but not for an outsider group, right? So there we have to develop empathy, which comes in with compassion, the part of the spiritual quotient. So your intuition comes in with self-awareness. So you need those aspects to be able to be a better self. If you are a better self, we will make better decisions and we will be happier to go outside that circle, let go of our fear to create more change. But then you need assistance and tools to do that change. So for example, something we're doing with our centers of sustainable happiness that are being launched is an Uber for meditation, so that at any point in time you can reach out for help and guidance in any form that you want. So that is an example of how we use the spiritual quotient. But every individual needs to have that spiritual quotient beyond IQ and EQ to be able to have the intuition, empathy, and compassion with a lack of judgment and fear to really unite rather than divide.
Nice. And we usually always think about seeing the better side of the things outside, not realizing we have to create our own better self first. Again, such a powerful thought that I'm taking away with me. So a lot of times, one thing is being spiritual is actually letting go of one's extreme emotions, pains, anger, and sufferings, and rather being indifferent and selfless. And we talk about stoicism on the same lines, but isn't it what makes us human? What are your thoughts on the topic?
Exactly. That's why, if we remember safety in the gear factor, I said, don't have emotional restraint. And I was hoping that you'd ask me that so I could delve into that a little more here, since we didn't have, we were running out of time. So this is a very important factor. We live in societies that are frameworked. The frameworking starts with education. Education teaches us to be in boxes, and there's a box, there's a box for someone who's has autism, there's a box for someone who has ADD, there's a box for someone who is rude, there's a box for someone who's polite, and there's a framework we developed for the sake of someone somewhere who marketed that this is a better way of acting or a better way of being, and then everyone jumped onto the bandwagon. Just like we jump onto Instagram, just where you jump on the press, you see one face 500 times on the cover and you say that's the most famous actress, right? Now that famous actress becomes also the most beautiful actress. Now the politician, you first see PM Modi initially becomes the best prime minister. The press changes the story, he becomes the worst prime minister. So, I think it's a lot of propaganda where you have a utilitarian attitude, where utilitarian is about the masses, versus an individualism attitude where I believe in the one soul concept, right? We're all one soul. But if we treat each soul with value versus a number that we spoke about earlier, if we don't say we're successful in COVID because the numbers have gone down, but we talk about eat, there should be zero numbers. When we have a terrorism attack, we don't say how many people died. We say one person died, that's too much. Then we go closer to the fact that we need to define ourselves as that one soul, and we can and then we say we're going to be ourselves. We're not going to have the imposter syndrome. You come to the present moment, you get self-actualization. You don't know how to be an imposter. There's no distinction between you, a dog, a bird, a plant, you and me, your company, and yourself. So you're not a different persona for everyone. But again, that you have to work through, understand intuition and self-awareness is the key, and how to link to that key, how to listen to your intuition comes with practice as you move up to self-actualization through the various ways that I mentioned. There are many, and everyone has a different way of relating, whether, as I said, it's chanting Sahat Samadhi, whether it's first starting with exercise, first starting with eating, first starting with enjoying. So that's how I would say that we need to achieve that.
Yeah, thanks. I know, Kanika, we always think there is one way, but actually there are several ways. It's just, doing one thing which works for you. I mean, for me, maybe, clean eating has started working really well in the last 1 year. For somebody, it's yoga, chanting, like you said, but it's just what resonates with you well, but it's all about doing it. Now, if you look at the whole COVID situation in India, I want to touch upon, something for the volunteers here. And a lot of us are actually volunteering to help save the communities and also save lives. And there are tons of initiatives that Tech Mahindra has taken. We are setting up, and it's all over the news. We are setting up 50 oxygen plants in India. We have a 24 by 7 COVID SOS saver service, like I said. We all of us now are volunteers, or many of us. In fact, Sumit, he's changed his title from SVP to a community volunteer. That's how we've actually imbibed the culture of volunteering for the country. What's your advice to all the volunteers out there to stay positive, motivated, and making sure that they never burn out, because all of us do in one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question, because you can say that, and it's like a healer. The more you heal, or like a mother, the more you give out, you're going to get exhausted at some point. So I wanted to share a little story that when I met the Dalai Lama, what happened. So I I don't like to, I like to believe in the one soul concept. So for me, dogs are our children, and we have 8 German Shepherds in Bahrain, and they've all been puppies and offspring of each other. What happened prior to me meeting the Dalai Lama is one of them was going to attack the other, and I didn't instinctively think. I put my hand. The other one was younger and the other one was older, and they were jealous because I was stroking one, and the other one said, "Oh, I want to come in." And so I put my hand to separate because he was going to go bite his neck, and I thought the younger puppy would not be able to protect himself. I put my hand in, and accidentally the older one, his tooth went into my little finger here, and it was accidental. He didn't know. As soon as he knew, then he moved his face. My finger was hanging at that point. It had got disjointed, and you couldn't feel it, and it was hanging and bleeding. And anyway, to this day, I will not be able to move this finger beyond this point. That's it. That cannot move it more. It does affect, it's the main nerve that it affects. So it does affect, opening bottles, opening doors. It's not a big deal. It's just still the last finger. So other hands are intact. Not such a huge thing. But I said to the Dalai Lama, I said, that was pure compassion. I forgot about myself. My mother happened to be around and was, even at this age, they scream at you and said, what are you doing? Why did you do this? And so I said, well, I thought it was a moment of compassion. I didn't think of myself. So I said, but the result was bad. I said, my finger doesn't move. Like, shouldn't the universe reward me for the fact that I had so much compassion? So he says, no. He says, that was compassion. It was actually his geisha who answered this question. And he said, that we call compassion without wisdom. So then I understood. And he said, it's like that old cliched saying, right? You take care of yourself first so that you can take care of others. You put the oxygen mask on yourself first in the flight, which is a cliched saying, so that you can put it on your child. Now, if you collapse, how will you be a volunteer? If you collapse or you get depressed and you're just doing the motions and you're not feeling it anymore, it's a transfer of energy. That's why I said the soul. It's not the body that's doing the work, right? It's not us, it's our soul, right? If we're gone from this body, the body remains, right? It's a picture. We could be the picture, but the soul is the one that's feeling an energy, interpreting with the brain, talking. It starts with you must have experienced telepathy. So even if we say, okay, the brain works and the body works with brain, your brain's not there anymore, therefore you're not there. No. What about telepathy? When you suddenly have a thought, I've seen this many times. You communicate with nature, you get an answer. You communicate with the universe, you get an answer. It starts happening often. So that's the soul. That's why I say the soul concept. And that's why if you start thinking of yourself as a soul, then you will start taking care of yourself as a soul. Because sometimes we become selfless and think that selflessness is compassion. So that's the lesson I learned. It's not, I owe it to the Dalai Lama and his team.
That's such a wonderful lesson, Kanika. Thanks for sharing, because uh, and I can tell you something from our experience as well. Some of the volunteers who are on the WhatsApp group, and there have been some really tough times when we've not been able to save somebody's life, and that of course bring down the morale. But then if we were able to save somebody's life and we share a screenshot to the other people, oh my God, that brings another level of energy and compassion towards actually doing more volunteering work. So I think those stories are really important, really powerful, and yours is even so meaningful, because the way you said, the outcome was not good, but it was, you did it out of compassion. So, and compassion is the key here, right? So uh, let me let's talk a little bit about what is sustainable happiness, because sustainability in happiness is so important, right? And how is spiritual quotient related to gratitude, humility, and sustainable happiness?
Well, first of all, it's a good question that you asked, and I think I just wanted to respond to what you said about the volunteers and how you share while answering this question, and how you, when you share an image of a successful story where you've saved someone, and how that helps people to be motivated, because our ego is always, I think, is part of our soul. And though there's a common misnomer that the ego we should get rid of, I don't think we'd be alive. And it's the ego that's satisfied, and not in a bad way. There's also good ego that then helps to get that motivation, right? When you, even though the volunteers are selflessly doing this. So I love that story, and it connects very well to your question of spiritual quotient, sustainable happiness. Now, again, people think that sustainable happiness is not possible unless you get rid of the ego. And they say, therefore, because you can't get rid of the ego completely while you're in this form of life, we cannot achieve sustainable happiness. How can you always be happy? And so let's interchange. That has been a criticism often in the West, especially, and neuroscientists have often criticized that, because when they analyze brain patterns, they're like, oh, you can't always be happy. You're going to be a robot. Otherwise, you're not a real person. So if we interchange happiness to peace, or being in the present moment, is what I would call it. Aren't you happy no matter what happens, right? Why do the volunteers volunteer? It gives them happiness by giving. right? Whether the result is good or bad, at the end of the day, they keep going because they're giving. So even though you may encounter something sad, you have sustained that level of present mindedness, mindfulness, and peace, right? You can move to you can be unpeaceful for a second, but you can move to that to peace. So sustainable happiness means that you're sustaining for a longer period of time that sense of peace and present mindedness and happiness. And how do you get to that? How do you relate? Is the tools that the spiritual quotient, and I only shared a few, but there's much more. It goes much deeper. The framework and the philosophy goes much deeper. In terms of, I wanted to leave you with something that everyone could remember and start off with. But there are so many levels of that, right? We go into, as I say, when you say the one soul concept, then you have to look at what is karma. Do we believe in the hierarchy of the karmic theory? Do we believe, so it goes further. But I think the basic spiritual quotient that I shared with you can help you to get to that moment of center. And it's all through experience, because each one of our lives are on a different path of experience. So therefore, artificial intelligence cannot give you sustainable happiness. That's where a human being cannot. I know we're on tech, we're Mahindra Tech, but I love the way Sumit aligned tech and the division and the united when he started off. And I love how deep you've gone, right? And you've been in the tech world. It often we think tech, it desocializes us. Often we think tech means there's no human behind it. But this is an example of how you need the human being. You cannot produce a country of AI robots and get rid of humanity and be behind screens and Zoom calls. So that's what I would say is very important to achieve sustainable happiness from the spiritual quotient.
Fantastic. And Kanika, I think listening to you the last few minutes, I know, and I'm sure like everyone on the call has started to realize the importance of spiritual quotient in their lives, and they've started to understand what it is. But if we were to begin somewhere, how is there any advice you would like to give us to the viewers? How should we begin? Are there any resources? Are there any specific people that we should follow? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we're trying to. So as I said, we're launching the Center of Sustainable Happiness soon, which goes through the pillars of various aspects of spiritual quotient. It really works with Maslow's hierarchy because, often people forget that nutrition is a very important aspect. You can meditate all you want, but there are certain chemical imbalances, hormonal imbalances that result due to a lack of nutrition. Simple. Right, and we forget that we've siloed everything. We've made specialists. Cardiologists will say, "Oh, I don't know why I'm having a headache." The neurologist will say, "I don't know why you're having an ankle pain. Go to the orthopedic." We've forgotten how to be holistic. If we go backwards, it's almost like we have to go back to the root. And if you look at it, in those days, we didn't hear about the COVID crisis. We didn't hear about the political crisis. We didn't hear about everyone trying to take a crisis and use it as a fad and promote themselves on Instagram. It's the world has gone topsy-turvy. The way we think has gone topsy-turvy. So, we need resources like this to go back. And of course, you're doing great work with your SOS Seva. And, I think that more resources like that, more volunteering. And another thing, as I said, we're doing the Uber for meditation. We're setting up the centers of sustainable happiness physically, but then COVID happened. So now we're going virtual with that so that you can experience the track to guide you. And, we're always adding more people. We have spiritual leaders on our, as far as providing these services. But what I wanted to leave you with was you don't have to be a spiritual leader to be spiritual. Someone said to me, you talk a lot of spirituality. It really sits with me, but you don't wear a robe. You don't wear a robe like a monk. You come in a dress, or you come. And someone said, a friend actually said that to me. I wrote name, but first I was a little offended. I said, "Oh, why can you not think so deeply?" And you see, this is an image I want to leave with everyone. Everyone has the spiritual quotient within them. We're born with it. What happens is we encounter environment, we encounter educational frameworks which need to be changed. We encounter society, we encounter boxes. We change the way that spiritual quotient gets suppressed. So all we're doing is finding tools of unsuppressing that spiritual quotient through these methods. And in the Center of Sustainable Happiness, you will be allowed to do that, but we're also inviting people who, everyone in their walk of life who has experienced or wants to learn spirituality, who thinks they can guide others. I've learned a lot just from you on this call, Hitesh, and Sumit, from the things you've said, they're sticking to me. And that will become part of a learning and a reframing of my intuition. So I would leave everyone with the fact that everyone has the spiritual quotient within them. They don't need to find it, they just need to relearn it and experience it.
And Kanika, you won't believe there's so many questions coming in from the viewers, and maybe given that we just have 7 minutes to go, maybe I'll take a couple of them. And the first one is, but do share what helps you relax and calm down. What makes you reach that state?
Okay, so for me, there are two things that help me relax and calm down. Is one, being around a soul which is very pure. For me, as I said, I already shared about dogs. I call them souls. I don't call them dogs. Nature, and that's if I'm feeling very restless. And then once I've experienced that, I'm able to then go into my meditation state. What makes me calm straight away is I do a Buddhist meditation called Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I do the Gayatri Mantra, and I change it around. Sometimes I do Sahaj Samadhi meditation. It depends what my physical state is that day. That's why I keep focusing. On days where I've not eaten properly, I find I have to go to nature. And that immediately, it's like a reset in a minute.
Wonderful. I think that we all are souls. We all know it, just that we always tend to forget. It's just so important for us to keep reminding ourselves of that, right?
Yeah.
Another question, how do we balance between spiritual quotient and emotional quotient? The reason is today's situation has questioned a lot of people in many ways.
Yeah. So the emotional quotient talks about, I mean, it's a very good question, because the emotional quotient I'd said earlier talks about, what is your again, emotional quotient is high. People consider it as high. The current measure is when you are ensuring that you can empathize with others, or at least show that you're empathizing with each other. But you see, I found a fine line between EQ and SQ, where SQ also incorporates empathizing with yourself, like that compassion example I used, compassion without wisdom, and where volunteers need to replenish themselves. Also, what happens is that EQ, I find, has a boundary, and it's boundary to your own community. You can have a high level of EQ, but look at the Palestine-Israel crisis, or Islam, Hinduism, what happens in India often. They're practicing, often it's the most religious people who've been practicing meditation, etc., who have gone fanatic with their EQ. So SQ is more about that introspection of the individual. If each individual relates to that and connects to the universe, you will not see bad. I've seen it in myself when I've done chanting. Sometimes, I'm not perfect. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that person, I don't like that person. Start with that thought, oh, that person did wrong to me. They were corrupt. They did this, they that. Suddenly, at the end of the chanting, you're sending them positive energy. You're seeing the good. Then you realize, no, all of us have good and bad. My bad might be, I decide to be unhealthy and not follow a proper nutrition for the day, and then realize, wait, I'm not helping someone else if I'm fainting by the end of the day, right? So someone else's unhealthy may be different. So everyone has negative and positive, right? I get nervous if a family member is at risk health-wise. You'll see me in my calm. In a hospital, I'm totally out of my calm. You can give me the biggest business crisis, but you put me in a hospital, a family member has to go to hospital, I'm losing it, right? I'm like, the doctor has to talk to me 20 times. So, all of us have that imbalance, and it's in a day that changes from time to time, and that's normal. That's why I say no emotional restraint. That's normal. So emotional quotient teaches you to framework it again. It doesn't teach you to go to your intuition. When you go to your intuition and you connect and you start experiencing that sense of peace and surrender, then you know what that balance is. When you're without fear and you know the universe is there to be kind, that kind universe will give you that calm.
Thank you, Kanika. I think I would say these were the best 60 minutes, one of the best 60 minutes spent ever for me personally, with so much to take away on spiritual quotient and so many other deeper concepts. I'll hand it over to Sumit. We're on top of the hour. Thank you, Kanika.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hitesh.
Thanks, Hitesh. Kanika, thank you so much for sharing the true power of spiritual question, guiding through the journey from crisis and pain to sustainable happiness. My few key takeaways as I was taking notes, we often hear telepathy, communicating with nature, energy. All of this is nothing but one soul. Selflessness is compassion, and happiness is peace. I'm sure many of us can identify with our very own red cardinals, and even better, after listening to you, many of us would want to be the one. Allow me to leave you with an invite to join us in being the red cardinal for someone right now. Watch this and please donate to this cause.